For content information and the written version of this chapter, please check the description below. This is the 6th chapter of serving 1 of my story, A Doughnut from Cakeopia, and is titled History in the Words of Granny Eccles. Please subscribe to see more stories like this. Consider donating to my Cash App to help me financially, or donate directly to my GoFundMe to help with my transition. I also have my commissions open. Check the description for more details, where you'll also find my email. Now on to the story. The warm afternoon sun slipped in through the 18th century glass window, touching the needle, allowing it to glisten as it penetrated the fabric, followed by a long thin line of pink thread. The old woman hummed to herself a merry tune while she stitched. It was something she did often, and her works of art embellished 20% of her home. From small pictures of birds to grand visions of forests, no one could better Eccles when it came to embroidery. As she continued with her work, movement caught her eye. Through the window she could see 2 figures approaching. One she didn't recognise, but the other she knew all too well. Eccles threw what she was working on down onto the arm of her chair and sprung towards the door. "Birthday, my dear!" she called after waving her hand. Beedee skipped over to her grandmother joyously, giving her a huge hug when she was within touching distance. "Far too long it's been, my love. Come in, invite your friend." Beedee looked over to SJ, standing nervously a few feet away. He walked calmly towards the house when he was convinced it was safe to do so. As the pair entered the small 18th century cottage, SJ looked around, admiring the home. It reminded him of his own place, but this seemed slightly more modern in comparison. Eccles stayed standing until her guests were sitting comfortably on 2 wooden chairs, each with a handmade cushion to sit on, making it much more comfortable. "Can I get you anything to drink?" Eccles asked, excited to have guests over. "We're quite all right, Granny. You should sit with us. You seem tired." Beedee stood helping the old lady to her chair. Eccles was a small, plump old lady. Her skin was golden brown and adorned with crystallized sugar, which glistened like her needle beside her in the afternoon light. Her hair was made of squishy currants, which fell stiffly to her shoulders underneath a tall dark hat. Her long black dress covered her feet. It was loose, making it easy to manage as she sat, unlike Victoria's, which SJ remembered back to when he first met her. This memory caused a slight giggle, which he quickly stifled so as not to seem rude. Eccles passed her legs, looking over at her guests, smiling beneath a large black bow, which, like SJ's collar, pushed up under her chin. Eccles then straightened her overcoat and looked deep in thought, as if remembering what to say. For a while, SJ, Beedee and Granny Eccles made light conversation about the weather and how each were feeling. SJ also introduced himself. Beedee smiled warmly at her grandmother, trying to not worry her about the situation they were in. "What's wrong, my girl? Spit it out," Eccles encouraged. "It's Mother. She is after us," Eccles sighed. "Always a difficult one, was Victoria. I remember when her father, Sponge Cake, asked me to look after her and her sister Madeira." SJ leaned forward, intrigued. "Victoria has a sister?" he asked. "Yes, Maddie. She was set to continue her father's legacy in the event he were to expire like his mother before him." This was a lot of information to take in. Not only did Victoria have a sister, but a father and a grandmother of her own. As someone who never had a family, SJ found this unusual and interesting all the same. "Tell us about Victoria's grandmother," SJ asked, unsure whether grandmother was the correct term. "Genoa was a lovely woman. From what I knew of her, she always dreamed of running a kingdom, being a queen and having an amazing lineage. Of course, nobody here can produce a child of their own, so she created the adoptive system, where she would adopt a person she felt had what it took, so to speak. Now, she chose Sponge." Eccles raised her finger to emphasize that what she was about to say was of the utmost importance, "and taught him all about how they were to make a land free of cookies." SJ looked over at Beedee, who sat cross-legged on her chair, with her fists under her chin, engrossed in her family's history. History, in the words of Granny Eccles, was indeed told in a way akin to a bedtime story. SJ and Beedee were the children refusing to sleep until they had heard it to the end. Cookies? Asked SJ in confusion upon hearing this new term. Yes, cookies, that's right, young Sanjay. SJ didn't correct the woman on the mispronunciation of his name. He instead allowed her to continue. Cookies are a group of people, much like us cakes, or you doughnuts, that lived here long before Cakeopia. I'm surprised you don't remember them. After all, weren't you here before that? SJ thought hard, trying to remember the times before Cakeopia. He remembered the freedom he had, the fact he could go wherever he wished, with no wall to keep him inside, but he didn't recall any cookies. I kept to myself a lot. I wasn't even aware of Victoria until she built a wall around us, he decided would be his response. Speaking of how long we've lived, how come you look and act so much older than me, when your clothes and homes say you were born at least 2 centuries later? SJ asked, hoping the question wasn't too personal. Unlike you and birthday here, filled with bright, sugary sweet jam, she motioned to the pair. SJ looked over at Beedee, surprised to learn she was also filled with jam. Raspberry, she whispered before turning her attention back to her grandmother. I'm filled with dried up old currants. The old woman laughed, eliciting the same response from her audience. As I was saying, Genoa and one of the cookies. Eccles took a moment to think. I forget which one. They didn't get along, and so a secret fight between them happened, and Genoa ended up being expired. This meant Sponge became head of the cakes and set in motion the foundations of what we now call Cakeopia. He had adopted 2 daughters, Maddie and Victoria. He invited me to raise them, feeling as though they needed a strong female role model. Maddie had no interest in continuing her father's plans and left. It appeared as though the more the old lady remembered, the harder it was to compose her thoughts. Auntie Maddie left home. Beedee continued the story for her grandmother. She adopted 2 sons, Swiss Roll and Jacondi Sponge, and hasn't been seen since. My mother took on the role her sister was planned to have, and when Grandfather Sponge expired in an accident, she built Cakeopia, and in that first she adopted 4 daughters, first Blondie and Brownie, then Chiffon, and then me. Beedee beamed. Eccles looked over at SJ with a sullen look on her face. Birthday, dear, could you do me a favour and go grab some thread from the chest in the attic? I feel like stitching again. Beedee nodded and skipped out of the room. Everything Birthday said was true except... SJ tilted his head in concern. What was Granny Eccles about to tell him that had to be kept from her own granddaughter? Birthday is not what she seems. Years ago, there was an accident which caused Birthday to expire. SJ's eyes widened in shock. Expire? He asked, scratching his bald head, sugar flushing on the floor. Yes, Birthday is far older than she believes herself to be. In fact, she may even be older than you or I. After he was expired, SJ's eyes widened so much they looked as if they'd fall out of their sockets. He? Eccles nodded. Yes, Birthday was a man before he expired. Upon his burst out of life, Victoria, so grief-stricken by her old friend's passing, ordered for him to be found. On the outskirts of Cakeopia, just by the northern wall, a girl was found covered in rags, using her candle to keep her hands warm. You see, us cakes have always believed when somebody expires, they just reform into a new body with no memory of who they once were. Birthday confirmed this. There is no way you could mistake that candle for anybody else. SJ took all that was said in. Beedee had been expired and had come back. Victoria adopted Birthday in her new form and hid the truth from her. Sanjay, she must never find out about this. It'd break her. Eccles stood to emphasize her point. Find out what? Beedee asked, confused, holding 2 spools of thread, one in each hand. Just as Eccles was about to respond, she saw movement coming from outside the window. It was Blondie and Brownie. They found us. SJ panicked in confusion. Beedee dropped the thread, which unravelled at her feet. Run! Out the back door! Eccles encouraged, shooing him away. Beedee stumbled on her words, but she was ignored. Now! Eccles screamed without a second guess. SJ grabbed Beedee by the arm and dragged her through the kitchen and out into the garden. He was about to run back in to get Granny Eccles, but Beedee placed a hand on his shoulder to stop him. It's too late, SJ. They would have gotten her by now. SJ slumped in defeat. He had only known Granny Eccles for a short time, but being around her made him feel like he had a place, a family, as if she were his own grandmother. Someone at the cafe must have told them where we are. Beedee held her breath, trying not to think about what that meant for CCU and her customers. If we were never to escape this place, SJ, it would be now. SJ shook his head. No, we have to go back to the cafe. He stared ominously. What? Why? Beedee asked in surprise. My freedom is not worth the imprisonment of hundreds of others. We need to go back to the cafe, see the damage they've caused, and then take down your mother. Beedee knew SJ was telling the truth, and when she saw the silhouette of one of her sisters approaching the back door, she grabbed SJ by the sleeve. You're right. They wouldn't expect us to go back anyway. We have to stop my mother. SJ looked over to Eccles' cottage. For Granny Eccles, he whispered to the wind. For Granny Eccles. Beedee repeated as the pair got up to run. If you enjoyed this chapter, please subscribe to my channel for more content like this. On Thursday, you can see the classic retelling of the legendary hero Beavis of Hampton. On Saturday, you will see a half-serving recap of A Doughnut from Cakeopia, focusing on chapters 1 through 6, also with a breakdown. And next Tuesday, you can see the next episode of Under the Queer Umbrella, which will be based on the asexual spectrum. Thank you for your support, thank you for subscribing, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.